Now we have the editor-in-chief and co-founder of All Rise News, Adam Klasfeld. Adam, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So we have some major news here as it relates to one of Donald Trump's biggest priorities, and that is his imposition of tariffs. Can you explain what just happened in the courts?
What happened in the courts was a 3-judge panel in one voice declared that the entire architecture of his tariff scheme was illegal. And what happened is this 3-judge panel, they represented an array of different appointees. One was appointed by Trump, Timothy Wraith. Another one, Katzman, is an Obama appointee. And another is a Ronald Reagan appointee. And having seen this hearing as it was happening, it was clear where the wind was blowing. And that's because Trump is the first and only president to have ever claimed the power to unilaterally impose tariffs. And what this court did, they looked at the authority he used to claim that, and it's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And they found it authorized no such thing. As a matter of fact, the legislation doesn't mention the word tariffs. So they went through the history of the statute. They went into Trump's use of it. And all 3 judges, in a per curiam order, meaning unsigned, they're all speaking in a single voice, found this entire scheme was unlawful.
And so what happens to all of the goods that are en route right now that are waiting at ports and where they're collecting tariffs? What happens to folks who today may have paid the additional tariffs that were imposed by the Trump administration, but done so in an illegal fashion?
Right. Well, I mean, the implementation of this remains to be seen. In the judgment, it mentions something about 10 days. And you can imagine it was destined to be appealed, and the Trump administration put in their notice of appeal almost immediately. So we'll see how quickly this determination comes into fruition. But it's very unlikely that the Trump administration will succeed on appeal. I mean, again, look at the composition of the panel. For them, it was not a close call. This 1977 legislation was supposed to restrain the president from being able to take actions like these unilaterally. It was supposed to put some constraints on it. Trump was citing it for the opposite, and it was stricken down. So from any kind of country thinking that there's going to be a tariff, I think Wall Street will be breathing easier, even though a story broke a couple days before this ruling that they've already called Trump's bluff. There was an acronym going around, TACO, Trump always chickens out. But they don't have to worry about whether he will or won't chicken out, because the entire legal architecture just wasn't based on any sort of legal foundation.
And yet that's what he has a pattern of doing exactly that. When Stephen Miller threatened that the Trump administration could suspend or eliminate habeas corpus was literally put in place as a check on the executive branch, not something that the executive branch could wield. It was expressly so that a monarch or a king wouldn't be able to just disappear people, political opponents, dissidents, whatever it was, without any due process. And then for the Trump administration to be able to say, this is our power to wield, as opposed to a check on the executive branch itself, a check on the White House, goes to show that they're perfectly content to pervert the meaning of any law, any statute, to pretend that they have powers that don't exist for them. You had brought up this idea of TACO, and that was Trump always chickens out. It's that acronym. There is some worry that knowing who Trump is, knowing his character, that he would actually take that as a challenge. And he'd say, in very much the same way that like Obama back at the correspondence dinner, circa 8 years ago, basically made fun of Trump and said, "You'll never be president." And that was like his inciting incident. That was like the inciting moment where this villain was born. If somebody says that Trump always chickens out, is there some concern that when you see that, you're like, oh shit, like that may actually mean that the entire global economy sees trillions of dollars disappear, because now Trump has been challenged on his inability to carry through on these tariffs that have been imposed. And so tomorrow he's going to go ahead and see this thing through until the end, no matter how much he takes down with him.
Right. Well, Trump can declare anything he wants, but the courts have now found it's illegal. Someone's going to have to carry out in order to raise the tariffs. And right now, there's an order that's barring not him, the entire apparatus of the government, saying that this action is totally illegal. So if Trump declared that, if he took that as a dare, then we might see other contempt proceedings,
Right.
than what we're already seeing in the immigration cases, for example. I wanted to go back to something you said about the habeas cases. You were right on about how Kristi Noem getting habeas exactly backwards, and the power of a king. We should also remember that habeas corpus is a principle from 2015. Kristi Noem wasn't only wrong, as we put it in one of our stories at All Rise News, it's literally medieval. High Middle Ages is what
Yeah.
we're talking about. And King John, a monarch, was forced to sign the Magna Carta, which brought us habeas corpus. So that's how far back we're talking about turning back the clock. But I would say that the TACO acronym that's buzzing around Wall Street comes for a reason. The administration does ultimately back down, and it happened today just before the tariffs story. They had been trying, there was this heartbreaking story of an immigrant whose initials are OCG, fleeing anti-gay persecution in Guatemala. And just hours before this ruling on tariffs, there was a status update from the government saying that they are going to get a plane to try to send him back to the United States. And that happened because they were forced to by litigation. So for all of the very justified concern because of the rhetoric of this administration about, oh, we don't need to listen to the courts are all, left wing and all that nonsense. For all of that rhetoric, that's a concrete example. That's a person being planned to be sent on a plane out of the zone of persecution where he is currently standing. That shows the court rulings actually in action and leading to results.
Yeah, I think we'll take any glimmer of light wherever we can. In terms of the Trump administration recognizing the barrier put in front of it by the courts right now, is there any way that they could pervert or manipulate some other existing law on the books? I'm sure that they just found IEPA, which is this statute that they could then try and distort to make fit into their tariff policy. They just found something that they thought they could distort enough to make it work for them. Is there some possibility that they can find something else on the books, while they're going back hundreds of years to try and figure out some way to just justify their actions right now?
Right. Well, they had to get pretty deep to try to even come up with IEPA to begin with. Another thing I would say is, to a certain extent, the administration, even though this is a huge loss for them, they're appealing it. I wonder if in their heart of hearts, if they're not breathing a sigh of relief, because this is a disastrous policy for the administration. It should be emphasized that the problem isn't necessarily the law, it's that Congress has the power to impose tariffs. And I think that Congress, particularly the GOP Congress, there are many people in that who did not want their fingerprints on this tariff scheme, which is why they weren't intervening. But now that the courts have, I'm sure that some of them are breathing a sigh of relief that this is very unpopular with their constituents, and now they don't have to touch it. So will they find something else? Well, there's not much there in the books because the Constitution is clear. Congress has the power to impose tariffs, not the executive.
I mean, you're exactly right in the sense that that this is a disastrous policy that Donald Trump has perpetuated. And I think in large part, the reason that he's barreled ahead with this is because he's driven largely by his ego, and so he already started. He's pod committed. He views any capitulation as weakness, and so he's just going to barrel ahead and try and protect his own ego throughout all of this. And so, is there this is less of a legal question and more of a political one, but do you have any concern that Trump is going to also view the courts taking an axe to this as an act of hostility against him, and so knowing that he often doesn't just give up, even though it would be good politics? Look, none of this is good politics as far as he's concerned, and so do you have any concern that he'll view this as like an act of hostility against the courts and just be driven yet again by his ego and look to appeal this thing?
Right. Well, he's currently appealing it. He's definitely going farther. As for his hostility with the courts, he has been in open conflict and war with the judicial branch of our government since the beginning of this term and earlier, whenever things don't go his way. I remember covering the aftermath of the 2020 election, and he found ways to hand wave the fact that his own appointees were ruling against him, that judges appointed by presidents across the political spectrum were ruling against him because his lawsuits were nonsense. And the same thing is happening here, that I think by the New York Times' count, more than 170 rulings have at least temporarily blocked some aspect of the administration's actions. And breaking that down even further, that's 170 findings that the administration was doing something that was likely illegal or unconstitutional. He's going to keep pushing the limits. He's going to keep testing the edges of it. And I think the greater concern isn't he'll be really angry that the courts keep stopping him, but more that the courts won't stand up, won't show their backbone. But right now, that's what they're doing. They're standing firm. Right now, there have been rulings in both directions, certainly on some times, but by and large, it's resoundingly the administration facing rout after rout over illegal and unconstitutional actions. And I expect that to continue.
Adam, let's finish off with this. This is a little bit of a different topic here, but do you have any concern that in the Trump administration's efforts to prevent the courts from being able to hold contempt proceedings, that will have some impact on whether or not this administration is ultimately going to comply with any of these rulings, how they're simultaneously trying to prevent the courts from even engaging in contempt proceedings in the instances where they don't want to follow along with the rulings?
You raise a good point, Brian, because right now I think you're referring to the budget bill, right? You have the GOP representatives trying to sneak in a provision in the budget bill, trying to disarm courts from exercising their contempt power. I think that's also up on a lot of the public seeing what's going on, seeing what the lawmakers are trying to do, and making sure the GOP reps understand that there are three co-equal branches of government, and that the judiciary has to be empowered to play its role in our constitutional order. And that may mean calling our representatives or letting the lawmakers know. I mean, I'll talk about this. There was a town hall where one of the GOP lawmakers was confronted with just that very topic that you raised. And he had to be forced to admit that he hadn't read that provision of the big, allegedly beautiful bill. Yeah. That part of it's escaped his attention. So that sort of people informing themselves of what's in the legislation and keeping informed about the news and what elected officials are doing, supposedly on our behalf, and making their voices heard when it counts, because that provision is not a law yet. It goes to the Senate, and there will be time to hear from the public to make sure that the checks and balances of our government remain strong.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that folks who are watching right now should recognize that we still have agency in this process. call your elected officials because it matters. They log these calls, and this bill hasn't passed yet. And to that exact point, there are a lot of dangerous provisions, like the Republicans trying to strip the court's ability to actually enforce contempt proceedings. That's buried in this bill as well. And so this thing isn't a done deal. We still have the opportunity to bring this into the public view and make sure that it's fixed in time for the prospect of this bill actually being passed. Adam, where can folks who are watching right now read more from you?
They could read it at allrisenews.com. We're on Substack. So if you log on to Substack's app, you can go to All Rise News and subscribe to us. We're about a month old and we're getting strong, and we are constantly having an eye on the latest court decisions and also on your power to act upon the headlines that disturb, that provoke, and that move us to civic action.
Well, I love that. And look, for everybody who's watching, I have followed Adam's content for a very long time. This is exactly the kind of stuff that we need to be supporting here. So I'll put the link to All Rise News right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Adam, appreciate the work you're doing, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate your work as well.